Okay, we are back streaming live on YouTube. I am calling State of Georgia versus Robert Moore. So they're at the jail. If you're Robert Moore, wave at me to confirm that. All right, thank you, sir. Uh, the Mr. Moore is charged with possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, warrant 2025 WA 73025, discharge of a gun near highway or street, warrant 026, discharging a firearm under the influence, warrant 027, obstruction of a law enforcement officer, warrant 028, and reckless conduct, warrant 030. And representing the state is Ms. Thomas, and representing Mr. Moore is Mr. Rogers. And Ms. Thomas, you can call your witness.
Your state will be calling Officer D. Dorsey. Officer, could you please raise your right hand?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you solemnly swear and affirm that the evidence you should give before the court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Put your hand down, state your name for the record.
Demontre Dorsey,
How you employed?
Clayton County Police Officer.
And were you so employed on or about the 3rd day of March 2025?
I was.
And on that date, did you have occasion to investigate an incident that occurred at Dixon Road and Terra Boulevard within the confines of the city of Jonesboro, Clayton County?
Yes, ma'am.
And did that incident involve a Robert Moore?
Yes, ma'am, it did.
And what brought you to contact with Mr. Moore?
There was a shooting off Dixon Road that my sergeant had heard. She immediately called us over radio. She observed two black males coming down from Dixon Road. When we tried to initially make contact with them, they continued to cross Terra Boulevard. One stopped in the median of Terra Boulevard. Mr. Robert Moore continued to cross the street of Terra Boulevard, across the street to Gibbs Auto, which is where we made contact with him. After talking to Mr. Moore, he advised he didn't know what was going on, and after we explained to him that there were shots being fired in the area that he just recently left, he said he didn't know nothing about it. Officer canvassed the area and traced the path that Mr. Moore had walked in and found a 9mm G3 Taurus handgun right there beside.
Here, wait a second. When you say you traced the path, that means you backtracked the way he had just come?
Yes, ma'am.
And where did he come through any bushes or anything like that?
No, ma'am. He crossed right over Dixon Road, across Terra Boulevard through the Gore, and continued to cross the street of Terra Boulevard near Gibbs Auto.
So it's just pavement, no people around, it's just literally
pavement and grass. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, and where was the weapon found?
Right there by Gibbs Auto sign, which is where he had recently crossed the path at. Right where we initially made contact with him.
Could you tell if the weapon had been discharged in any way?
Yes, ma'am. The barrel was warm to the touch in 40-degree weather. I asked Mr. Moore about it. He said he didn't know nothing about a gun, even though the weapon was in the vicinity that he had just left from.
Okay, what was the lapse of time between the time that you found the weapon and the time that y'all detained him?
Probably a 2-minute time lapse, ma'am.
Okay. Now, after detaining him, after finding the weapon, what happened next, if anything?
After we found the weapon, other officers on scene went to canvass Dixon Road, which is where Sergeant Ward seen them both male subjects leave from, and was able to find shell casings matching the same caliber as the rounds that was inside the magazine.
No rounds themselves were recovered?
No, ma'am, just the rounds that was located inside the magazine. That was the only rounds that were recovered.
And you mentioned earlier it was 40 degrees. Was that cold?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, was anything distinct or unusual about the defendant himself?
Just him not wanting to stop after we tried to get him to stop before he attempted to cross the road. When we initially tried to get him to stop, he just threw his hands up. He acknowledged that we were there. He threw his hands up saying he ain't did nothing, continued to keep crossing the road, and kind of tried to be a little bit, I guess, trying to move out of the way from his friend, just advising that he didn't do anything wrong.
Was there anything, was he under the influence of anything that you all could?
Mr. Moore did have an odor of alcoholic beverage coming off his breath when I initially made contact with him during questioning. He did have a slight slur speech, but mainly I did not create do SFSTs on him, but he did have an odor of alcoholic beverage coming off his breath.
Now, when you all were pursuing him, did anyone tell him to stop in any kind of way?
Yes, we did instruct him to stop before he decided to cross Terra Boulevard to get to Gibbs with Gibbs Auto, which is where his friend stopped. His friend actually stopped in the middle of the Gore on Terra Boulevard and Dixon, where we had no issues with him. He completely stopped. But however, Mr. Moore continued to keep crossing the roadway after being told to stop, which got him to the area of the Gibbs Auto where we found the pistol.
Now, Gibbs Auto, is this a business?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Open for business, people there?
It was actually closed that time of night.
Okay, but were there other people about?
No, ma'am.
Was there any type of business or apartments or anything like that within proximity?
There was a hotel right beside Gibbs Auto.
Okay. And the weapon was being discharged within proximity of people?
Judge, I'm gonna object. That's leading.
I'll move on, Your Honor.
Yes. Yes, ma'am. The weapon was discharged
Oh,
on
so that's
Dixon.
how-
Okay, there was an
I'm
objection. She's moving on to
Okay.
the next question. Mhm.
Now, also, you made a determination that this gentleman was a convicted felon. What did you base that on?
Off GCIC, ma'am. I did conduct a criminal background check just to ensure, because he did tell me that he had an ID out of Virginia and that he did not live in the state of Georgia, that he had just recently got there. Without him having a Georgia ID, I did do criminal history search on him, and it did state that he was a convicted felon out of New York during 2020, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. And you indicated it started out as two people walking away from you all.
Yes, ma'am.
One stopped, one kept going.
Yes, ma'am.
The person that stopped, did they indicate any type of ownership of the weapon?
No, but he did have a warrant out for his arrest at the time. So I'm not sure what his case might have been, but my officer did ask him if the weapon belonged to him. He said he didn't know nothing about it.
Now, were you equipped with body cam or anything at the time?
Yes, ma'am, I was.
And did it commemorate or did it capture your interactions with with this defendant
Yes, ma'am, it did.
and the other defendant? Other officers dealt with him?
Correct, ma'am.
And were they equipped with body cam?
Yes, ma'am.
Did it capture their interaction with him?
Yes, ma'am.
Did it capture you all finding the gun?
That'd be Sergeant Ward's body cam who actually captured the initially finding the weapon.
Okay. And all that body cam, can you tell us where that is now?
Pretty sure it's somewhere in the cloud, ma'am.
When you say in the cloud, are you talking about the police?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you know if anything else, any other video captured what happened that night?
Probably the dash cam footage from being en route to the call.
Now, you indicated your sergeant witnessed this. Do you know if her dash cam captured anything, or did she just hear it?
She heard it initially, but I came lights and sirens due to the nature of the call. So my
Okay.
body, the car camera was rolling at the time.
Okay. The actual discharge of the weapon, did Sergeant Ward see that, or did she just hear it?
She heard it because she was sitting in the gore of Terra Boulevard and Dixon Road.
So she was actually right there.
Yes.
You know, I think that covers everything before the court. Oh, one more question. The persons can you see everybody in court today?
Yes, ma'am, I can.
Do you see the person that you interacted with that evening?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you identify him by physical appearance and or article of clothing?
Yes, ma'am.
Please do so.
Orange jumpsuit with dreads.
Okay. And I think that's all I have at this time. Reserve right for rewrite.
All right, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you. Also, I heard you mention the sergeant. Well, I don't know who's the lead on the case right now.
I am.
Okay. Um, and if I understand, this was nighttime or at least after dark.
It was nighttime. It was early morning because I work from 10 to 6.
And let's see. So I guess just so I'm clear, was there a call about the shots, or is it just that sergeant heard
The
shots?
sergeant was on duty at the time. Like I said, she was sitting in the Gore on Terra Boulevard and Dixon Road when the shots initially came out, and she radioed up to other units in the initial area to help check the area, which is when we observed two males coming from Dixon Road, the same direction that the shots came from.
And I don't want to assume too much about Dixon Road, but does it go two different ways? As in, it goes towards Terra and away from Terra, correct?
It does go towards Terra and away from Terra, sir. At least to a residential neighborhood.
And as far as you know, well, I don't want to assume, does anyone claim to ever see the shots that are fired?
No,
And so no, number one, there's no description of whoever's supposed to have fired the shots, is that
no,
correct?
sir.
Um, and nobody's told you what direction the person who fired the shots was headed or anything like that.
No, sir.
And I know we just talked about there being, they can go in two different directions and there being a residential neighborhood. Um, is at the time that I guess first let's do it like this. As Sergeant do you know where she's actually situated? Like, can you say what she could have seen from right there?
It's not what she could have seen, it's probably what she could have heard.
Yeah.
Close proximity of where she was sitting at and the gunfire.
Right. And that's kind of what I guess I'm trying to ask because I thought you said, and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought you said she was sitting kind of in the gore at the intersection of
Yeah,
Dixon
she
and
was sitting in the Gore at the intersection of Terra Boulevard and Dixon.
And so kind of what I'm asking is like, to your knowledge, and again, I know you may or may not know, if you weren't in the vehicle, but is she able to see down Dixon? Like, is she able to look down that street?
Yes.
And so do you know whether or not any law enforcement can see, I guess, the other ways that a person could go as far as away from terror, any
No.
sort of side streets or anything?
No.
And so if I understand correctly, at the time that he's being stopped, it's because he's coming from the general direction the shots were fired in.
Correct.
But at the time when law enforcement makes contact, and even with what's the sergeant's name?
Sergeant Ward.
Sergeant Ward. When Sergeant Ward hears the shots, and at the time when law enforcement makes contact, y'all don't know the exact location where the shots were fired at that point.
No, sir. We just know they were coming from down from Dixon. That's the only nearby road in that area. Well, main road.
And just about that clarification, he said like there's some side roads off of Dixon or something maybe.
Correct. Like I said, it's in a residential neighborhood.
And I don't want to assume, but if nobody sees the shots fired at the moment, y'all don't have any idea what direction the shots were fired in, as far as up in the ground, up in the air, into the ground. Like y'all don't know.
No.
And if I understand, the firearm is never seen or found in Mr. Moore's actual possession. Like it's not found on his person.
No, it was not.
And I thought you described Mr. Moore as continuing to walk after the first person stopped on the median. Is that correct? He was walking.
Yes, that is correct. Like I said, we initially made contact with him and his friend in the Gore. His friend stopped him to gore. He continued to walk across the street after being told to stop, which is when we observed Mr. Moore continue to walk across the street near the Gibbs Auto, which is where I found him fidgeting inside his pants with unknown object, and at between the sign where we found the weapon at.
Do you all know whether or not anyone else had walked down that path? I guess in the minutes
No,
before
sir.
that? No, no, you don't know.
No, sir.
Okay.
There was nobody out around that time. It was late.
When you say there was nobody out around that time, well, let me ask you like this. Where are you coming from? I know you said you were running lights, but where are you coming from?
Down Terra Boulevard, northbound.
You're northbound on Terra Boulevard. And I guess, where is Gibbs in relation? Like, guess I'm trying to determine, would you have passed Gibbs Automotive while
No.
responding to okay.
When I was responding to it, I seen Mr. Gibbs, Mr. Moore himself, cut across the street as I was coming down.
But Gibbs is still ahead of you at that point, if I'm
Yes.
understanding. Okay.
And by the time I made initial contact with him, Mr. Moore had initially was able to get to the Gibbs auto sign.
And just so I'm clear, at no point, like people aren't running from the scene or running from the police or anything, correct?
No, sir. Just walking away.
And if I understand, you said that, well, let me back up. You don't find anything related to a firearm on him, like a holster or anything like that?
No.
And I understood you say that there were no field sobriety tests given, but I just want to make sure, we're all on the same lingo.
Yep.
Does that include like no breathalyzer or anything like that?
There was no breathalyzer. Georgia state law, you are not supposed to utilize a firearm under any type of alcoholic beverage or any sort.
And just so I'm clear, so there's no sobriety test either, right? Like as far as like walk and turn, one leg
No,
standing.
sir.
Was any blood drawn?
No, sir.
I think I'm just about done, but I just need one moment just to check. And just initially, you said you were responding regarding the shooting. I just want to make sure we were clear. Nobody is shot, right?
Nobody is shot, no, sir. Just shooting in the area.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't a shooting of a person. No further questions at the moment, Judge.
All right, Ms. Thomas, any redirect?
Very briefly, Your Honor. On Defense Cross, you mentioned something about this gentleman fidgeting with his pants.
Yes, ma'am.
You saw him doing that.
Yes, ma'am.
Was that within proximity of where the weapon was found?
Yes, ma'am, it was.
And when I say proximity, could you tell by how close? Was it like where he was standing or was it further away?
Where he was exactly standing.
The other person that was there, where was he standing?
In the gore.
So
on the other side of Terra Boulevard.
I'm sorry.
He was in the gore on the other side of Terra Boulevard.
So he was nowhere near where the fidgeting part happened?
No, ma'am.
And I believe counsel asked if anyone was injured. Was anyone injured?
No, ma'am, nobody was injured.
Just the discharge?
Correct.
And you didn't do standard field sobriety evaluations on this gentleman, did you?
No, ma'am.
He wasn't charged with DUI?
No, ma'am.
But you did smell the odor?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Did you know if any of the other officers noted the odor?
Yes, Officer Ward did. Sergeant Ward did, I'm sorry.
Okay. So at least two of you all noted that he was under the influence of possibly alcohol?
Yes, ma'am.
And I believe that's all I have.
A couple of follow-ups, Judge.
Okay, go ahead.
Also, Did I hear you correctly? Are you saying that, well, it sounded like you just said the gun was basically found at Mr. Moore's feet, essentially. Is that what you're saying?
I'm sorry, sir.
I said it sounded like you basically just said that the gun was found at Mr. Moore's feet. Is that what you're saying?
No.
Okay. Because maybe I misunderstood either the question or the answer. When you make contact with Mr. Moore, well, let me ask, you're the one that makes contact with Mr. Moore?
I never made contact with the store. That is my sergeant.
Okay. You said your sergeant made contact with Mr. Moore?
With Mr. Moore?
Right.
No, we both initially made contact with Mr. Moore. I spoke with Mr. Moore and she walked back to canvass the area where he initially just left from after I told him to come towards me.
Right. And that's kind of the part I'm asking about. So when you say went to canvass the area, where is the weapon found in relation to where Mr. Moore is?
Exactly where he had stopped at, where I seen him fidgeting in his pants.
Right.
Right
So you
there
keep saying,
between a dirt path and the sign of Gibbs Auto.
okay. So you keep saying where he stopped at, which to me would imply at his feet. So that's what I'm asking is, where is the weapon found in relation to where?
Right there beside the Gibbs Auto sign.
Okay, how far is that from where he has stopped at?
He stopped exactly right there before I initially told him to stop and come towards me because I seen him fidgeting in his pants.
Okay. Do you see anything fall?
No, sir, I didn't.
And are you on foot at that point?
Yes, sir.
Do
I
you
just
hear,
got out of my patrol vehicle after trying to get him to stop from walking away from us.
do you hear anything fall?
No, sir.
And had any officers been in that area, I guess, prior to that? Like, I don't know if y'all trying to maybe, cut them off or anything.
No, sir.
And just so I'm clear, so in relation to where he is, where law enforcement actually makes contact with Mr. Moore, where is the firearm approximately like distance-wise from there?
After I initially told him to come towards me, probably maybe 20 to 30 feet.
No further questions.
Ms. Thomas, can you have the witness clarify? I want to make sure I understood correctly where the shell casings were found.
Officer, can you clarify for the court exactly where the casings themselves were found?
Off Dixon Road,
How far is that from where he was?
maybe 0.4 miles.
Fairly close.
Yes.
Was
I'm sorry,
that,
I didn't hear that question. What was that?
I said fairly close. You want the
Okay.
question before that, Your Honor?
No, that's why I didn't understand fairly close. I got you.
Okay.
Okay.
And where was Sergeant Ward positioned?
Right there, smack dab in the middle, probably 0.2.
So right there at
Right there at Terra Boulevard and Dixon Road. Yes, ma'am.
Dixon Road. And the shell casings were found, I think you just said 0.2.
Yes, ma'am. At Dixon Road behind the Bloom at Jonesboro.
So within walking distance?
Yes.
And where was the defendant in proximity to the shell casings?
About that time, he had already made his way across Terra Boulevard, across the Gore of Terra Boulevard, and near Gibbs. So maybe I would say a 2-minute walk.
Was it from the direction that the shell casings were found?
That was adjacent to it.
Okay.
Okay.
Honor.
What I'm looking, my clarification here, when we're saying that they were found on the road, are we talking about literally the shell casings were in the road?
Yes, sir. They was in the roadway on Dixon Road behind
Okay.
the apartments.
Okay, that's why I needed clarification
Okay.
on. I just want to make sure I understood that correctly. Mr. Rogers, any recross on that issue?
Yes,
Okay, go ahead.
you said that the shells on Dixon Road, and you said behind apartments?
Yes. The shots were coming from the main road off Dixon Road, but they were located on Dixon Road where I guess they acquired the shots behind the apartment complex because the apartment complex is right there, the backside of it.
Did law enforcement at any point, either before or after making the arrest, attempt to get any sort of video or anything in that area?
Yes, they did, but they were unsuccessful in finding any video footage.
And we say an apartment complex, it's like it's an active, open complex currently operating.
Correct.
No further questions at this time.
All right, Ms. Thomas, any follow-ups on those?
No, Your Honor,
Okay, does the state have any further witnesses?
not at this time, Your Honor.
All right, and Mr. Rogers, are you presenting any witnesses today?
No, sir, just argument, Judge.
Okay, all right. Ms. Thomas, do you want to reserve closing?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and go ahead, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you. Judge, I guess the first thing I'll start with is the whole idea of the discharge. Because there's a few different charges directly related to that. The idea that the discharge occurred near a highway, under influence, and I guess that the basis, as far as I can tell, it's the only basis offered for reckless conduct. For all of those charges directly, Judge, there's no evidence that, number one, that Mr. Moore is the person who actually fired the shots. Nobody witnessed him doing it. Nobody's said any video of it. There's no claim that he made any sort of admission to firing shots. Essentially what it all comes down to, as I understand it, because I guess, and there's two things I'll say about that. Number one, there's no indication that he's the one that fired the shots, but then number two, he's also not the only person in the area. There's, by their testimony, there's at least two people that they can see who are coming from one direction. And if I understand the idea or where Sergeant Ward is situated, both Mr. Moore and the other person would have been walking, directly towards a law enforcement vehicle. So they would have, obviously if they had anything unlawful that they had done or anything like that, they would be on notice that there's law enforcement in the area. Number two, I would point out that it sounds like there's at least, like I said, most roads, absent one ways, go in two directions, especially for a pedestrian. There's no basis to say that the people, just because these people are walking from this location, doesn't mean that there are not other people walking the opposite direction. It's behind apartments that leaves plenty of places that a person can just go into their residence at, or have come from. So that's part of my issues with that part of it, is that nobody's saying who fired the shots. There's no witnesses, and honestly, there's no basis really at that point to even stop Mr. Moore, because you don't have any basis to think that he's the person that fired the shots. Additionally, as it relates to the idea that he was at some point in possession, it seems to be that the allegation is that because Mr. Moore ended up stopping somewhere, which I guess is 20 or 30 feet, ultimately ends up stopping somewhere near where a firearm was found, doesn't address the fact that law enforcement was not coming from that direction, so they wouldn't know if someone had run in that direction prior to their arrival. There's no nothing I've heard rules out the possibility that someone would have crossed, from some other direction. We're talking about pedestrians; they're not required to use streets and things of that nature. A person can run through, grassy areas, whatever areas. And there's no basis to say that law enforcement had eyes on that location beforehand. So the fact that these people are coming up a street, like I said, they're not a car. They're not in a vehicle. The person who fired the shots, anybody could have gone any direction at that point. So there's no basis to say that Mr. Moore is number one, is the shooter. Number two, that he was ever in possession of a firearm. Number three, the other part, just to get a little more specific to both the obstruction and the disorderly conduct. The reckless conduct. Again, they don't know who fired the shots, number one, so I'm not sure what basis there is to accuse Mr. Moore. But number two, there's no basis to say that anybody else was out. They claim nobody else was out at the time. So it's not clear who possibly would have been harmed by whoever fired the shots. Additionally, they don't even know what direction the shots were fired. They could have been fired into the ground, um, into some sort of inanimate object. They don't know which direction the shots were even fired to allege reckless conduct. And firing shots in the ground, to my general knowledge, unless maybe I know you're not supposed to fire around water. If we're talking about concrete or something like that, there's been no allegation as far as which direction the shots were fired to allege reckless conduct. And it all kind of ties back into, nobody's put this gun in Mr. Moore's hand. So there's no basis to allege that he was in possession of the weapon. Additionally, as it relates to the obstruction, uh, I don't know what basis they had to require Mr. Moore to stop. He was free to continue walking. They don't have a description of a shooter. They don't have anybody saying that Mr. Moore fired shots. Nobody's reported him, described him, or anything of that nature. So at that point, they can ask him to stop. That's certainly within the law. But to demand that he stop and then charge him for not stopping, I don't know what the basis would be for that obstruction charge, Judge. So I would ask that all of the charges be dismissed for lack of probable cause. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And Ms. Thomas?
Your Honor, the officers testified that Sergeant Ward clearly heard the shots that were well within proximity of her location at the time, that she observed this defendant and another defendant coming from that direction. By that time, other officers, including this officer, had been summoned to the scene. They asked these gentlemen to stop. They took off running. In light of the fact that we're in a public area that is two intersecting roadways.
Just to that mischaracterization, I explicitly asked Officer whether or not anyone was running. He said that didn't happen.
Excuse me?
Yeah, I don't think there was any evidence of running.
They just continued to walk.
Didn't hear. So Miss
They
Thomas.
walk from the officers, as the officer just helpfully contributed. That they left the scene. They were asked to stop. They kept going. One gentleman did stop fairly soon. This gentleman kept going, and within his proximity of the weapon that was found to be warm when it was cold outside. I believe the officer testified that it was approximately 40 degrees outside at the time. The officers made what I would consider to be a reasonable assumption that this was in fact the weapon that was discharged, and it was found very close to where this gentleman was actually standing when the officer observed him. I think the word was fidgeting with his pants. State will contend there's sufficient probable cause at this time to determine that this gentleman, who was observed in a state of intoxication at the time that he was detained, was in fact the person who discharged a weapon in public, that he was under the influence at the time that he discharged that weapon, and that he refused to stop when the officers asked him to do so. State would ask the court transfer the case in its entirety to the Superior Court.
All right, thank you both. Based on the testimony presented, I do find probable cause to bind over all charges to Superior Court this morning. I will issue that order. Officer Dorsey, if you don't have any other cases, you can be excused. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And that will take care of everything on Mr. Moore's case. Deputies, you can take him back. Thank you, sir. And we can move to the Snyder matter.
Excuse me, Judge Parker.
Yes.
Two things. First, did you receive my email from this morning for the two cases for your calendar on Wednesday?
Yes, I think two consent bonds for
Yes, Judge.
the Wednesday. Yeah, I got it. So I'll take care of those in a little bit.
Okay, and may I please be excused?
Yes, thank you. Good to see you. See you Wednesday.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right.
Judge, you said you want Snyder next.
Snyder, And all right. All right, we're ready to go on Snyder here.
Yeah, and I had a question before we start.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was trying to get update on what happened with Tia Mari Reed. This is the person that was represented by Ms. Duvernay. I have an officer.
Reed, she let me know that that's gonna be a consent bond.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Officer Fuller, you're free to go. And Investigator Wallace, did you see my message in the chat to you?
Excuse me.
I put a message. Pulling, you're free to go.
Okay, I was
Investigator Wallace,
asking about my second case.
that one was already resolved.
All right.
Yeah, one left.
This is Investigator Wallace. No, I didn't see the message in the chat.
Okay, please check the chat because you might be here for no reason.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Yeah, I'm ready now.
Okay. All right. And let's see. Is this Mr. Rogers' case? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Got it. All right. Okay. I'm calling State of Georgia versus DeMontavious Snyder. So they're at the jail. If you're DeMontavious Snyder, wave at me to confirm that. All right. Thank you, sir. Mr. Snyder is charged with tampering with evidence, warrant 2025 WA 73096, and representing the state is Ms. Thomas, representing Mr. Snyder is Mr. Rogers. And Ms. Thomas, you can call your witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Deputy Davis, could you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear and affirm that the evidence you should give before the court this morning shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
Put your hand down, state your name for the record.
Deputy Rudy Davis,
How you employed?
Clayton County Sheriff's Office.
Were you so employed on or about March the 4th of 2025?
Yes, ma'am.
And at that date and time, did you have occasion to investigate an incident involving a DeMontavious Snyder?
Yes, ma'am.
And did that incident occur at 9157 Terra Boulevard, Jonesboro?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that within the confines of Clayton County?
Yes, ma'am.
And what is actually located at that address?
The Clayton County Jail.
And were you assigned to the jail on that date?
Yes, ma'am.
And what brought Mr. Snyder to your attention?
I received a call. Well, a call came out via radio from Central Patrol that a stabbing and a fight had taken place in Housing Unit 6, Section 5. I observed the inmate that was stabbed in infirmary. He had multiple lacerations to his face, the back of his behind his ear, that type of nature.
Okay.
And I went to go investigate the incident. I investigated further, and I observed on camera inmate Jalen Cornwell having an altercation with the victim, which is inmate Howell. I observed inmate Cornwell get a shank with a knife, a cutting tool from under the sink of Housing Unit 5, Section 5, Housing Unit 6, and began to pretty much turn him into fighting and that type of nature, grabbing his property off the day room table, the day room, which is that's inside where the cells are.
Okay, let me stop you 1 second. How many inmates were involved in the attack on the victim?
Far as I see, it was just 2 inmates at the time.
And they were both, so that's Mr. Owens and this defendant here?
No, ma'am, that's not that defendant. It's another defendant, Mr. Howell.
Okay, then.
So it was Mr. Cornwall, Mr. Howell that was actually involved in the altercation.
Okay.
Once Mr. Cornwall began to stab Mr. Howell with the shank, it was Correction Officer T. Powell that tried to break up the fight and intervene it. Once everything was breaking up, I had observed on camera that inmate Snyder, which is right here, take the shank that was used to stab Mr. Howell, take the shank from his right hand and throw it away in a clear trash bag that was right there by the multi-room, and that was everything that was viewed on camera.
Okay. And just to be clear, you didn't actually see this. You saw this as recorded as captured on video?
Yes, ma'am.
You could clearly see this defendant before the court?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Clearly, clear as day.
So he didn't have anything to do with the stabbing. He just took the shank.
No, ma'am. He didn't stab anybody. He just took the shank from his right hand while inmate Cornwall was on the floor and threw it away in a clear trash bag by the multi-room.
And he took the shank from who?
From inmate Jalen Cornwall.
Okay. Now, was that shank recovered?
Yes, ma'am.
Did anyone ask Mr. Snyder any questions about his interaction with the shank?
No, ma'am.
Did he make any statements?
No, ma'am.
Where is the video that you've been talking about? Where's it at now?
The video is saved to the in the jail, saved on the jail's computer in a camera room.
Were there any other witnesses to what happened?
Yes, ma'am. It was multiple inmates, and Correctional Officer T. Powell actually saw it as well. So,
And did the correctional officer see Mr. Snyder grab the shank and try to get rid of it?
it was, if I remember, it was her that actually stated it, or it was a specialist that was inside the a specialist that actually controls the door. One of them actually saw it.
So it's possible she saw him do it
Yes, ma'am.
and you were able to see that on the video.
Yes, ma'am. Clear as day on the camera. Clear as day.
Okay. And I believe I might have asked you this before, but just in case, he did not make any statements to you about what happened?
No, ma'am.
Did he make any statements to anybody about what happened?
Not that I know of. No, ma'am.
Now, the person that we've been talked to, do you see that person in court with us today?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you identify him by physical appearance and or article of clothing?
Yes, ma'am. It says Clayton County Jail, orange jumpsuit, hair kind of tied up in a ponytail. Yes, ma'am. It's right there.
Okay. And I believe that's all I have reserved right for redirect.
All right, Mr. Rogers.
Me too. Just briefly, the video that you mentioned, as far as you know, is it? And has it been preserved in evidence somewhere?
Yes, sir, it has.
And the alleged shank that was thrown away, to your knowledge, was it recovered?
Yes, sir.
Do you know if it's been placed in evidence?
Yes, sir. Lieutenant Cruz actually, her and Sergeant Fullerton correctional officers retrieved the shank.
And just because I wasn't sure exactly on direct, were you saying, you mentioned a CO and a specialist, I guess. Number one, what's a specialist when you?
So the specialist is someone that actually just sits in the tower and controls the doors. So the correctional officers go and do whatever they need to do.
And so if I understood you correctly, you were saying either a specialist or a CO actually was an eyewitness to it visually, like as far as not with the video, I should say.
So yes, sir. If I can remember, it was either the correctional officer or the specialist that actually saw it visually, that brought it up to Lieutenant Cruz that the shank was taken out of Mr. Cornwall's hand by inmate Snyder.
And I guess maybe I don't want to assume, but at what point, I guess I'm trying to figure out, it sounds like at that point, the alleged attacker is still armed and Mr. Snyder essentially disarms him. I guess I'm trying to figure out why. Do you know whether or not it sounds like the situation is still ongoing at that point, essentially, like he's still possibly a threat at that point?
So what I saw was Mr. Cornwall just fall on the floor, and Mr. Snyder just take the weapon out of his right hand and throw it in the trash bag. That's all I saw. I didn't see him come up to a CO and say, "Hey, here's the weapon." He just tossed it in the trash bag.
And when you say a trash bag, like what do you mean in the multi-room? Like I guess we just talking about like a clear,
A clear
trash?
trash bag. Yes, sir.
And the shank, I don't want to assume, but it sounds like it's probably bloody at this point.
That I'm not sure. I didn't see it.
Okay. You couldn't see the actual shank, you mean, when he's taking it out of his hand?
No, I saw the shank being taken out the hand. I just don't know if the shank was actually blooded or not. I didn't see the shank like physically. Like I didn't see it.
And the bag, he doesn't do anything with the bag after that, it doesn't.
No, sir. He just threw it in the bag and just walked away, walked back over there to inmate Cornwall.
No further questions at this time.
Ms. Thomas, any redirect?
Lady Thomas, you're on mute. Okay.
I'm sitting here talking and typing. But in any case, no, Your Honor, no redirect.
Okay. Does the state have any further witnesses?
Not at this time.
All right. And Mr. Rogers, are you presenting any witnesses today?
No, sir, just a brief argument.
Okay. And Ms. Thomas, do you want to reserve?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. And Mr. Rogers?
Judge, to me, it sounds like Mr. Snyder was, helping control the situation. I understand what Deputy said about him not taking the weapon to someone, but if I understand, it sounds like people are probably attending to the other inmate that ended up going to medical at that time. So I don't know that an inmate approaching jail personnel with a shank at that particular time would necessarily be welcomed. He doesn't attempt to use it or anything like that. He doesn't sound like he puts it, somewhere that I guess would be exactly hidden if it's just in a clear trash bag in like a common area of the jail. It's not, not claiming he put it on in a bunk or somewhere like that, or somewhere that will require some sort of shakedowns or anything of that nature. So, I understand maybe Mr. Snyder didn't follow the protocol that would be prescribed for an officer at the jail. But ultimately, it sounds like he kind of helped de-escalate the situation by disarming an alleged attacker. Now that's at the court dismissed for lack of probable cause.
All right, Ms. Thomas?
Your Honor, the rules and the regulations of the jail are fairly clear. And one of those regulations, I believe probably one of the most important ones, is they are not to have anything to do with what is described as a shank, which is an object that is used as a weapon. In this particular case, it was a fight between other inmates, did not involve this person. And subsequent to that fight, he takes it upon himself to take possession of the shank and attempt to dispose of it. Your Honor, he's charged with tampering with evidence, and it doesn't get any clearer than that. He did not have permission to do so. He did not acknowledge what he was doing. He appeared he wasn't trying to break up anything, that actually he was trying to conceal something. State will contend that sufficient probable cause has been presented for this case to be transferred to the Superior Court.
Okay. All right. Thank you both. Based on the testimony presented, I do find probable cause to bind the case over to Superior Court, and I will issue that order today. Deputy Davis, if you don't have any other cases on today, you can be excused. Thank you. And deputies at the jail, that'll take care of everything on Mr. Snyder's case. Thank you, sir.
And I have one case left. I've been trying to reach that deputy. I need a moment to try to reach out to him again.
Okay. I'm going to cut the live